They chose the wrong human. That was the first mistake. The second was believing he was alone. Ambassador Elias Vorn didn't look like the kind of man who could end a war. He was thin, graying at the temples, with tired eyes that suggested too many late nights arguing with people who didn't listen. His uniform, navy blue, gold trim, the quiet authority of Terran diplomatic corps, hung on him like it had seen better decades. The Carthaxi warlords saw weakness. They saw prey. They saw an aging bureaucrat walking into a den of predators with nothing but words. And they laughed. The hall of obsidian pillars echoed with it, deep, guttural, clicking laughter from mandibles and vocal sacs. The air smelled faintly of iron and something sweeter, like decay masked by perfume. The Carthaxi didn't do subtle intimidation. Everything about them screamed dominance: towering bodies, chitinous armor, blades grown from their own limbs. Ambassador Vorn walked anyway. Step by measured step. Unarmed. Unflinching. "You stand accused," rasped Overlord Draith, his voice amplified through a translator that struggled to keep up with the alien's layered tones. "Of trespassing sovereign Carthaxi space. Of espionage. Of insulting our empire with your negotiations." A ripple of amusement passed through the gathered warlords. Vorn stopped at the center of the chamber. Looked up. "Negotiation," he said calmly, "requires both parties to understand the cost of not talking." Draith leaned forward, towering even from his elevated throne. "And you believe you can teach us cost?" "I believe," Vorn replied, adjusting his cuff like he had all the time in the universe. "You've misunderstood who I am." Another wave of laughter. Louder this time. One of the lesser warlords, massive, scarred, clearly eager to prove himself, stepped forward. His clawed limbs scraped the stone, sparks flaring. "You are a messenger," the alien hissed. "A soft thing. A voice with no teeth." He moved faster than something that large had any right to. The blade, grown, serrated, glistening, swung for Vorn's neck. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Not out of concern. Out of anticipation. The ambassador didn't move. The blade stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. A single inch from his throat. The sound that followed wasn't a clash of metal or a force field hum. It was a dull, wet crack. The warlord's arm, bent the wrong way. Then shattered. Bone fragments, if they could be called that, punched through chitin in a grotesque bloom. The alien let out a scream that rattled the pillars. Silence fell like a dropped blade. And then, a figure stepped into view. He hadn't been there before. At least, no one had noticed him. Tall. Broad. Clad in matte black armor that drank in the light. No insignia. No rank. No decoration. Just function. His helmet was featureless save for a thin, horizontal slit glowing a faint, predatory red. He held the warlord's broken limb in one gauntlet hand. Effortlessly. The Carthaxi stared. Confusion. Then anger. Then something colder. Fear. The armored figure released the limb. The warlord collapsed, clutching his ruined arm, shrieking. The newcomer didn't acknowledge him. Didn't acknowledge anyone. He simply stood, slightly behind and to the right of Ambassador Vorn. Like he'd always been there. "Ah," Vorn said softly, as if remembering something trivial. "There you are." Draitha's translator crackled as his voice dropped several octaves. "What is that?" Vorn glanced back, almost casually. "My attaché." The room didn't buy it. Not for a second. The air shifted. Tension coiled tight. "You bring a weapon into our court," Draith snarled. "You violate." "No," Vorn interrupted gently. "You attempted to assassinate a diplomatic envoy." He paused. And failed. The armored figure tilted his head, just slightly, as if listening to something no one else could hear. 3 more warlords moved at once. Coordinated. Blades flashing. This time, there was no pause. No warning. Just violence. The black armored figure moved. And the universe seemed to lag behind him. One moment he was standing still. The next, he He was inside their formation. The first warlord's chest caved in with a sound like a collapsing building. The second lost his head, cleanly, surgically, before his body even realized it was dead. The third tried to retreat. Tried. A hand closed around his throat. Lifted him off the ground. Squeezed. The crunch echoed. Bodies hit the floor in a staggered rhythm. 3 seconds. Maybe 4. Silence returned. He stepped back into position beside Vorn. Still. Waiting. As if nothing had happened. The remaining Carthaxi didn't laugh this time. Draith rose slowly from his throne. "You dare," he whispered, "to spill blood in our sacred chamber?" Vorn folded his hands behind his back. "I dare to walk in here alone," he corrected. "That should have told you everything." A long pause. Heavy. Measured. Then Draith leaned forward, mandibles twitching. "That is not a soldier," he said. "Not even your kind breeds such things. What have you brought into my court, human?" Vorn smiled. Not warmly. Not kindly. But with the quiet satisfaction of a man watching a trap finally snap shut. "That," he said, "is why I'm here." The armored figure's visor flickered. For just a moment, something behind it shifted. Not a reflection. Not a face. Something deeper. Older. Hungry. "You see," Vorn continued, his voice carrying now, filling the chamber without effort. "You've spent the last 20 years raiding our colonies. Killing civilians. Testing our borders. Pushing." He took a step forward. "And we let you." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the warlords. "Let us?" Draith hissed. "Yes," Vorn said simply. "Because we needed you confident. Predictable." He gestured lightly to the bodies on the floor. "Reckless." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You're not warriors," Vorn went on. "You're opportunists. Bullies who've never faced something that hits back harder." Draitha's claws flexed. "And now?" "No," Vorn said, his voice sharpening just a fraction. "You've escalated. You've attacked a Terran diplomat. A beat. And you did it in front of a witness." All eyes turn. Slowly. Back to the armored figure. Draitha's translator struggled again. "That thing is your witness?" Vorn's smile widened. "Not exactly." The figure moved again. Slow. Deliberate. He reached up. And removed his helmet. Gasps erupted. Because what lay beneath wasn't reassuring. It wasn't human. Not entirely. The face was pale, almost too symmetrical. Eyes dark, completely dark, like voids where light went to die. Veins traced faint patterns beneath the skin, pulsing with something that wasn't quite blood. He looked unfinished. Or overfinished. Like something that had been perfected beyond necessity. He turned his gaze to Draith. And smiled. It was not a human smile. "I am," he said, his voice calm, almost pleasant. "The evidence." The translator didn't glitch this time. Every word came through perfectly. Which made it worse. Draith took a step back. Just one. But it was enough. "What are you?" he demanded. The figure considered the question. Tilted his head again. "As of yesterday?" he said. "A deterrent." He took a step forward. The entire chamber recoiled. "As of right now?" His smile widened slightly. "A declaration." Vorn exhaled softly. "You should have listened when we asked for peace." Outside the chamber, deep within the Carthaxi warship, alarms began to howl. Not the usual kind. Not internal security. Something else. Something external. Draitha's eyes widened. "What have you done?" Vorn didn't look at him. Didn't need to. "We arrived alone," he said quietly. "Just as you saw." A pause. "Leaving," he added, "is a different matter." The walls trembled. Distant impacts. Not weapons fire. Something heavier. Something deliberate. The black-eyed man, no, not a man, sighed softly. They're early, he said. Vorn shrugged. They were eager. Draitha's voice rose, cracking through layers of fury and something far more primal. What is happening? The figure looked back at him. And for the first time, there was something almost like pity in his expression. You attacked a diplomat, he said. Standing next to death. Another impact shook the chamber. Closer this time. Cracks spiderwebbed across the obsidian pillars. And somewhere, far too close for comfort, something began to tear its way in. Vorn adjusted his sleeve again. Calm. Composed. Completely unafraid. You really should have asked, he said, almost conversationally. What humans bring to negotiations when they expect things to go badly. The tearing sound grew louder. Metal screamed. Reality seemed to bend. Just slightly. At the edges. The black-eyed figure stepped forward. And now, he said softly, you get to find out. The wall behind the throne exploded inward. Not from an explosion. From something forcing its way through. And as the dust began to settle, the Carthaxi finally understood. This wasn't diplomacy. This was bait. And they had swallowed it whole. The wall didn't just break. It gave up. That was the only way Ambassador Vorn would later describe it. The obsidian chamber of the Carthaxi war court was built to withstand orbital strikes. Reinforced with layered lattice metal grown in zero-gravity furnaces. A place designed to outlast empires. And yet, it folded inward like paper in a storm. Something came through first not as a shape, but as pressure. A deep, grinding force that made every tooth in every jaw ache. Then came the sound, like metal screaming while it was still alive. And then the breach opened. Not a doorway. Not an explosion. A wound in the architecture of reality, tearing wide enough to let something answer the invitation that had been waiting for years. The Carthaxi warlords stumbled backward as silhouettes filled the gap. Human silhouettes. But not the kind they expected. Armored. Too many joints in the wrong places. Weapons that didn't glow, didn't hum, didn't announce themselves like civilized tools of war. They looked almost restrained. Like whatever power they held had been deliberately muffled just to avoid breaking the ship in half by accident. Boots hit the floor in synchronized silence. One step. Then another. Then the chamber realized something horrifying. There were many of them. Draitha's voice cracked through his translator, almost losing coherence. You brought an invasion fleet inside a diplomatic vessel? Vorn finally turned his head slightly. Fleet is a generous word, he said. This is just the response team. The black-eyed figure beside him, still calm, still smiling in that wrong, too human way, tilted his head toward the breach. Late, he muttered. A voice echoed from the opening. You try fitting a battalion through a maintenance corridor and see how punctual you are. A second figure stepped in. This one wore lighter armor, stripped down, almost casual. A combat harness over a diplomat's suit jacket. Cigarette tucked behind one ear like war etiquette had died somewhere, and nobody bothered to bury it. He looked around the chamber, took in the bodies, the frozen warlords, the shattered throne line. Then whistled. Well, he said. You boys made a mess fast. Draitha's mandibles clicked violently. What are you? The newcomer grinned. Emergency diplomacy. Behind him, more humans flowed in. Not marching. Not storming. Arriving like they already owned the place. One of the Carthaxi finally snapped. A warlord, larger than the rest, scarred in ritual markings, clearly a champion, lunged forward with a roar that shook the ceiling. He didn't make it 2 steps. He froze mid-charge. Not physically, but conceptually. As if the idea of him moving forward had been interrupted and overwritten. A human in the incoming line had raised a hand. No weapon. Just fingers slightly curled. The warlord trembled, locked in place, muscles spasming like something inside him had forgotten how biology worked. What did you do? Draith demanded. The human didn't look at him. Neural-restraint field, he said casually. Stops aggressive intent from becoming action. A pause. Then, almost conversationally. It's considered polite on Earth. The warlord dropped. Not dead. Just turned off like a switch had been flipped and nobody remembered the previous setting. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. Vorn stepped forward into the breach line, placing himself between the Carthaxi court and the arriving humans. He looked back at Drath. You were warned, he said. Drath's eyes were shaking now. Not metaphorically. Literally. His body couldn't decide whether to fight or flee anymore. This is an act of war, Drath hissed. One of the incoming humans laughed. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Buddy, he said, you attacked our ambassador. Another stepped forward, checking a device on his wrist. Containment perimeter stable. Ship integrity at 68%. Carthaxi command structure still intact, unfortunately. Unfortunate? Drath spat. The human shrugged. We like clean endings. The black-eyed figure beside Vorn spoke again, softly. Protocol confirms escalation threshold reached. Vorn nodded once. That it does. Drath suddenly understood something then. His rage faltered. Because this wasn't reactionary. This wasn't panic. This was procedural. Measured. Prepared. Long before the Carthaxi ever decided to attack, someone had already written the response. Drath looked at Vorn, voice trembling with something dangerously close to desperation. You planned this. Vorn's silence was answer enough. One of the warlords nearby tried to retreat toward the exits. He never reached it. The corridor outside simply ceased being accessible. A shimmering field sealed it off, warping space into a soft distortion that made direction itself meaningless. The human with the cigarette sighed. Please don't run, he called out. It makes paperwork worse. That made the other humans laugh. Not cruelly. Worse. Like they'd heard it before. 100 times. 1,000. Drath backed toward his throne. This is madness, he said. We are the Carthaxi Empire. We control 9 systems. We have eradicated 3 civilizations. Yes, Vorn interrupted gently. We know. The chamber went still again. Vorn stepped closer now, voice quiet but cutting through every panic signal in the room. That's why we came ourselves. A pause. You don't negotiate with predators when you can finally afford to remove them. The black-eyed figure moved again. This time, he approached Drath directly. Every Carthaxi in the room tensed. No one stopped him. Not because they were frozen. Because something in their instincts had already accepted the outcome. He stopped just in front of the warlord king. Looked up. You called me a weapon earlier, he said. Drath swallowed. What are you really? He asked again, voice smaller now. The figure smiled faintly. I'm what happens, he said, when humanity stops pretending it's harmless. A beat. Then. And I'm one of the nicer outcomes. Behind him, one of the human commanders spoke into a comm unit. Surface teams in position. Another reply crackled back. Orbital silence achieved. Drath froze. What do you mean orbital silence? The cigarette human flicked ash onto the floor. Means nobody's coming to save you, he said. Drath's claws tightened. You would start a war with the entire Carthaxi Empire? Vorn exhaled slowly. No, he corrected. You did. A distant vibration rolled through the hull. Not impact. Coordination. Something enormous aligning itself outside the ship. Drath's throne room lights flickered. For the first time, the Carthaxi war court felt small. Very small. The black-eyed figure turned slightly toward Vorn. Authorization? Vorn nodded once. Contained escalation, he said. No civilian targets. No collateral outside engagement zone. A pause. Then softer. Teach them what consequence feels like. The figure's smile widened just a fraction. Gladly. And then, everything changed. Not all at once, but in pieces. Systems began shutting down. Not failing. Choosing not to function. Carthaxi command links dissolved into static. Weapons systems locked. Ship defenses went dark one by one like candles being politely extinguished. And somewhere deep in the ship, something began walking through it. Not humans. Not Carthaxi. Something in between. Something that had learned both languages of war. Draith backed away from his throne fully now, voice breaking completely. "You're not diplomats," he whispered. Vorn looked at him, almost pitying now. "No," he said. "We're the conversation you have when diplomacy fails." The black-eyed figure stepped forward once more. And the lights in the chamber went out. Darkness didn't arrive. It was already there. The lights going out in the Carthaxi war chamber didn't plunge them into blackness so much as confirm what had been true for several seconds already. Control had been lost, and nobody had bothered informing the occupants. Then the emergency systems tried to kick in. Tried. They failed halfway through the attempt, like something had reached into the ship's nervous system and gently told it to stop pretending. Draith could hear it now. Not see. Hear. Footsteps. Not heavy. Not loud. Measured. Patient. Coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, as if the ship itself had learned how to walk and had decided to practice inside its own bones. A warlord screamed in the dark. It was cut off mid-breath. No explosion. No blade sound. Just sudden absence, like the universe decided he was no longer relevant to the scene. Draith stumbled backward, claws scraping stone. "This is impossible," he whispered. A voice answered from somewhere to his left. "Yeah," it said casually. "So was your expansion rate. And yet here we are." A faint glow ignited. Not overhead lighting. A visor. Then another. Then dozens. Human soldiers, spaced through the chamber like punctuation marks in a sentence the Carthaxi were finally learning to read too late. One of them stepped forward, helmet tilted slightly. "Commander says hold perimeter," he muttered. "No unnecessary kills." Another voice crackled over his calm. "Define necessary." A pause. "Anything that keeps them from picking up weapons again," came the reply. The soldier nodded. "Got it." Draith snarled into the dark. "You speak as if we are animals to be managed." A soft chuckle responded. "Animals adapt," the soldier said. "You lot just escalated faster than your biology can handle consequences." A shape moved behind Draith. He spun. Nothing. Just darkness and the lingering echo of movement that didn't respect geometry. Then the black-eyed figure spoke from directly behind him. "You're scared," he observed. Draith whirled again, mandibles clicking violently. "I am not." "You are," the figure interrupted, almost gently. "It's new for you." The Carthaxi warlord froze. Because it was true. Fear wasn't something their species had evolved to live with for long. They weaponized it. Inflicted it. Studied it in others. But this was different. This was fear with nowhere to project itself. No enemy formation to counter. No fleet to destroy. Just inevitability. "You keep calling yourselves an empire," the figure continued, walking slowly around him, voice calm, almost curious. "But empires rely on predictable retaliation. Predictable resistance." He stopped. "You never accounted for something that doesn't retaliate immediately." A pause. "Something that waits." Draith's claws trembled. "You mean, humans?" A soft laugh came from somewhere in the darkness, Vorn's voice this time. "No," Vorn said. "We mean patience." A sudden impact shook the ship. Not a breach. A system collapse. Something vast shutting down in layers, like a beast being quietly put to sleep by someone who knew exactly where to press. The Carthaxi war network, centuries of expansion, conquest, integration, began to unravel in real time. And they could feel it. Draith staggered. "What are you doing?" he roared. A human voice responded, bored. "Decoupling your command lattice from the orbital grid," another voice added. and isolating your civilian worlds so they don't get dragged into your mess. A third, almost amused. Also shutting down your FTL relay chain. That part was kind of optional, but we figured you'd try something stupid otherwise. Draith froze. You're dismantling an empire, he whispered. The black-eyed figure tilted his head. No, he corrected. We're removing its ability to expand. A silence fell. Heavy. Final. Then Draith did something unexpected. He laughed. It wasn't joy. It wasn't mockery. It was disbelief cracking open at the seams. You think this stops us? He hissed. You think killing one ship, one court, one world changes anything? We are Carthaxi. We spread. We endure. Vorn stepped into view again, finally fully visible. Tired eyes. Calm face. A man who had already seen this conversation play out in 100 variations before it ever reached this room. You misunderstand, he said. Draith snapped his mandibles. Oh, do enlighten me. Vorn's expression didn't change. We're not stopping you. A pause. We're quarantining you. That word hit harder than any weapon. Even the humans in the room shifted slightly at it. Draith's voice dropped. Quarantine implies containment. Yes, Vorn said. And containment implies survival. Draith pressed. Vorn didn't answer immediately. When he did, it was quiet. Sometimes. The darkness seemed to tighten around them. Like the ship itself was leaning in to listen. The black-eyed figure spoke again. Surface extraction teams report compliance resistance dropping to 0. A human in the distance responded. Copy that. Begin stabilization protocols. Draith suddenly realized something else. The humans weren't killing indiscriminately. They weren't burning the ship down. They were sorting it. Like a library being reorganized. Like a system being debugged. He backed away, voice hoarse. You're not here to destroy us, he said slowly. Vorn shook his head. No. A beat. We're here to decide what parts of you get to remain functional. That was worse. Much worse. Because destruction was simple. Understanding what to keep alive was surgical. Intentional. Judgmental. Draith looked around wildly now, searching for any remaining leverage, any escape route, any fragment of dominance he could cling to. Nothing. Even his guards were gone. Not dead. Just absent. Disarmed. Removed. Reassigned to irrelevance. Then the black-eyed figure stepped forward one last time. Close enough now that Draith could see the impossible structure beneath his skin, something engineered, something trained, something that had once been human and had since been rewritten for efficiency. You attacked a diplomat, he said softly. Draith snarled weakly. He was alone. A pause. The figure smiled. No, he said. He was first contact protocol. Silence. Then realization. Draith's mandibles slowed. First contact? Vorn's voice came from behind again, almost conversational. You ever wonder why we let your raids continue for so long? Draith didn't answer. He couldn't. Vorn stepped closer. Because we needed you to believe we were slow, he said. Disorganized. Divided. Another step. So when we finally arrived as one system instead of a dozen governments arguing over jurisdiction. He stopped. You wouldn't recognize the shape of what you were looking at. Draith's voice broke. You're not a species, he whispered. Vorn tilted his head slightly. Neither are you, he said. And then, the lights returned. Not fully. Not warmly. Just enough to show Draith what remained. Humans in formation. Systems restored under new control. Carthaxi command hierarchy flattened into monitored nodes. And everywhere. Order. Cold. Precise. Unavoidable. The black-eyed figure stepped back into position beside Vorn. Waiting again. Like he always had been. Vorn looked at Draith one last time. You wanted war, he said softly. A pause. You just didn't realize you were asking the wrong species to define the terms. And somewhere deep in the ship, something locked into place. Not a weapon firing. Not a kill order. A decision. Final. Structural. The Carthaxi Empire didn't fall that day. It was simply reclassified. And Draith, standing in the ruins of his own certainty, finally understood the most terrifying truth of all. Humanity hadn't come to fight them. It had come to decide what they were allowed to become. And that judgment was already underway. Draith stopped fighting when he realized there was nothing left to hit. That was the moment everything truly ended. Not with explosions. Not with conquest. Not even with surrender. Just absence of options. The warlord king of the Carthaxi stood in the dim chamber, mandibles twitching in uncontrolled pulses, as if his body still believed resistance was a valid concept in a universe that had already filed it under obsolete. Around him, the war court was no longer a court. It was a containment space. A controlled environment. A cage that politely insisted it was still architecture. Humans moved through it without urgency. No shouting. No chaos. Just calm efficiency, like technicians cleaning up after a malfunctioning system that had briefly mistaken itself for a god. One of the Carthaxi collapsed to his knees and laughed. It wasn't bravery. It wasn't insanity. It was the sound of a mind refusing to update its model of reality. We conquered worlds, he rasped. We burned fleets. We broke civilizations that resisted for centuries. A human walked past him, glancing down. Yeah, the soldier said mildly. We read the reports. The Carthaxi looked up, desperate now. Then why are you here like this? Why not destroy us? Why not? Because you're expensive, the human interrupted. A pause. Then, almost apologetic. In logistics terms, that silence hit harder than any weapon. Draith turned slowly toward Ambassador Vorn, who still stood where he had stood since the beginning, as if the entire collapse of an empire was just background noise to a scheduled appointment. You called this a negotiation, Draith said hoarsely. Vorn nodded once. Yes. Draith's claws tightened. This is extermination. Vorn shook his head. No, he said. Extermination is messy. Emotional. Reactive. He gestured lightly around the chamber. This is administrative. That word. Administrative. It didn't belong in war. Which was exactly why it was so devastating. The black-eyed figure stepped forward again, now without urgency, as though the situation had already been resolved and he was simply finishing the paperwork. All Carthaxi strategic nodes are now under observation control, he reported calmly. Another human responded through comms. Civilian systems stabilized. No strikes executed. No collateral confirmed. A pause. Empire intact, the voice added. Functionally downgraded. Draith staggered. Downgraded, he repeated weakly. Vorn finally looked at him directly. You'll still have your worlds, he said. Your people. Your infrastructure. A pause. But expansion ends here. Draith's voice cracked. You're imprisoning an empire. Vorn didn't hesitate. Yes. Silence. Even the remaining Carthaxi seemed to understand, at last, that arguing terminology was no longer meaningful. Draith lowered his head slightly. What happens now? He asked quietly. For the first time, Vorn's expression softened, just a fraction. Not kindness. Not mercy. Something older. Fatigue. We watch, he said simply. A beat. And we wait. Draith looked up sharply. Wait for what? The black-eyed figure answered. For you to decide what you are without conquest. That landed differently. Uncomfortably. Because it wasn't punishment. It was denial. Denial of purpose. Denial of expansion. Denial of the one thing the Carthaxi had ever defined themselves by. War. Draith let out a slow, broken exhale. You think we won't try again? Vorn met his gaze. I think you'll try, he said. I think most species do. A pause. But now you know the cost of being wrong about us. The chamber was quiet for a long time after that. Not peaceful. Just recalibrating. Then something unexpected happened. A subordinate Carthaxi, young, unscarred, still trembling from everything, spoke. Why not kill us? She asked. Her voice wasn't defiant. It was genuinely confused. The kind of question asked when worldview collapse hasn't yet been replaced with anything stable. The black-eyed figure tilted his head. Because you're not the problem, he said. A pause. You're the precedent. That made no sense to them. Yet. Vorn stepped slightly aside, as if concluding a briefing. Let this be recorded clearly, he said. His voice carried again, commanding now, not as a threat, but as a statement of law. The human diplomatic corps will not tolerate attacks on accredited envoys. A beat. The response is not escalation. Another beat. It is containment. Draitha's mandibles clicked softly. So this is what you are, he murmured. A species that turns war into policy. Vorn considered that. Once upon a time, he said, we were just like everyone else. He glanced briefly at the black-eyed figure. Then we learned what happens when you wait too long to respond. A faint, almost invisible smile crossed the figure's face. Not pride. Memory. Outside the shattered court, the Carthaxi ship continued to drift in controlled silence. Entire fleets beyond it had already ceased their aggression, not because they were destroyed, but because the chain of command that told them to be aggressive no longer functioned. Not dead. Just disconnected from intent. Draith finally sank onto his throne, which now felt less like authority and more like furniture left behind in an evacuated building. So what now? He asked again, quieter this time. Vorn turned slightly as if preparing to leave. Now, he said. A pause. Now you learn that being dangerous isn't the same as being untouchable. He walked toward the breach where humanity had entered. The soldiers followed in reverse formation, clean, precise, unhurried. The black-eyed figure lingered for a moment longer beside Draith. You'll remember this, he said softly. Draith didn't respond. The figure nodded once, almost respectfully. Good. Then he turned and followed the others out. The chamber slowly returned to stillness. Not freedom. Not peace. Something far more uncomfortable. Accountability. Draith remained seated for a long time after the humans left. No alarms. No screaming fleets. No burning worlds. Just silence, and the knowledge that somewhere above and beyond them, humanity had placed the Carthaxi Empire into a category that could be monitored, adjusted, and corrected. Not erased. Managed. And as Draith finally understood what that meant, one final realization settled in his mind like ice forming in deep space. They had attacked a diplomat. Standing next to something they had mistaken for protection. But the truth was simpler. He hadn't been standing next to death. Death had been standing next to him. And it had just finished its report. Yendi.